Hello, thanks for joining me. I hope you can see and hear me as usual. Today we're going to talk about two interrelated themes, both of which transpired in England when I was there about a week or two ago. In short, you may have heard me talk about Doormat Christianity, which we're going to touch on because it's very relevant. Well, we're going to talk about how doormat Christians are being turned into Muslim prayer mats. So it's not bad enough that they're doormats for all and sundry. They're now being used as prayer mats to Allah. I'll explain what I'm saying, and yes, a lot of it is symbolic, so don't get too upset. But first of all, how are you all? Greetings from Ireland. Gandalf, is that me? Yeah, Gandalf, I'll take that. Hello, Raymond. North Carolina here. We can hear you loud and clear. Awesome. Wonderful. I will be revisiting these chats in due course. But now let's get into it. So what am I talking about? All right. So two things happened, both in England. I was invited to give a talk. You may have seen the video, or I've already talked about it before here on YouTube, and I've written about it on Substack. I was invited to a conference that was titled Christian Revival, Our Post-Liberal Hope. And it was co-hosted by Pusey House, Oxford, and the Danube Institute, based in Budapest. And we're going to talk about that. And I should point out, this was my first time in England, believe it or not. Now, I've been to many countries in Europe, and of course, outside of Europe. I've been to very small countries. I could say their names, but people from there might get offended because I called them small. But I had never been to England, believe it or not. And I guess one of the reasons, it wasn't of my own doing, but one of the reasons is most of the countries I go to, it's because I'm invited to speak and so forth. And for some reason, England had never invited me. I'm sure that's not shocking. But I had an interesting experience there, experiences. I spent... well, first there was the airport experience, which was kind of surreal from what I'm used to. Okay, I'll just say it. When I got there in London, I think it was Heathrow, I didn't think I was in England. All right. I thought all the pictures on the walls were of black people, Muslim people. I don't think I saw any advertisements showing white English people. A great amount of the workers, the security and so forth, had the nice Salafi Muslim beard. And this actually worked out for me well for once. If I may have told you this before, but usually when I go to airports, and all things considered, meaning that usually I'm running late and I'm literally running and in pain because I have a bad knee. And by the time I get there, I'm sweaty and I'm a big guy. And then I walk through the metal detector, which always goes off, partially because I have metal in my knee or titanium and elsewhere. I was told that's one of the reasons it always goes off. And then when they search my bags, they would often find Arabic writings of jihadist material with pictures of ISIS and Al-Qaeda because, hey, I'm a hard worker. And even when I'm flying, I take my work with me, translating and whatnot. So usually those didn't end very well for me. No, they did end. They ended okay, actually, except one time. But anyway, so what was interesting is that this time when I went through Heathrow, I was like the last guy that was checked. They smiled at me and said, "Go on, brother." And near me was some old white lady who was being frisked. So I guess you know who's really in charge there. But anyway, anywho, so after that, I went directly to Oxford, to where that talk was going to be held. And I got to tell you, that was a beautiful city. It's right up my alley, sort of thing, what I saw there. Very fascinating, studious, medieval-looking city. And I also like it because of its connections with people like Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. And I even got to see some related sites for both those fellows. So that was a great city, Oxford. But And I thought it was away from London and from all the sorts of things that people are complaining about Muslims. But apparently they told me, no, it's the same thing there too, including the grooming gang, the grooming gang business, which we all heard of. And is it Rotherham? That was just the tip of the iceberg. It was everywhere, including in Oxford, quaint little Oxford. So yeah, there it was. But anyway, I just thought I would share my little experience flying into Heathrow and England. And for once, I was seen as the good guy. All right. So let's talk about this intersection that I'm referring to, from doormats, which is bad enough, to prayer mats for Islam. And I'm, of course, referring to, if you don't know, I'm going to get to the scandalous spectacle that thousands of Muslims exhibited on March 16th, which was the day I was flying back, leaving England, which is that they took over, I forget what it's pronounced or called. Is it Trafalgar Square? Somewhere in London, an iconic spot. And thousands of them went there and sprawled their bodies everywhere in prostration, and on megaphones, Quranic verses were blasting, including Allahu Akbar, because, they're breaking their iftar fast and they're celebrating. And hey, freedom of religion. And of course, the Muslim mayor, Sadiq Khan, was there, and we'll talk about him and what he said. But so it's interesting because how the two themes that I'm referring to, the one which I talk about a lot, and you've heard me probably talk about it, and so this may be a little bit redundant, but we'll have to go through it just to make sure we're all on the same page, and that is the concept of a doormat Christianity. But then we're going to amplify it by looking at this business of a Muslim mass prayer in London and see exactly how it connects to a doormat Christianity, and even more so, turns doormat Christianity into Muslim prayer mats. All right. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, everything I'm going to say, of course, is related. So, bear with me. So my talk at the Pusey House of Oxford was about, essentially, you may have seen it, the video's out, but it was basically about how Christians have lost sight of morality. I've spoken about this before, and how they are essentially materialists without even knowing it, basically like their atheistic counterparts. And that because of this, a moral vacuum has been created in the West. And guess who's exploiting it? Someone who still believes in morality. This vacuum, that is, of course, Islam and Muslims. And yes, believe it or not, Muslims do engage in morality, and they engage in more moral behavior than lots of Westerners. The problem is you don't know what morality means anymore. You think morality begins and ends with not hurting someone. That's not what morality is, actually. We'll get into that. And also my talk also looked at how basically this is the doormat point, that because of this materialist component, and because Christians basically follow the atheistic worldview, which is that all that matters is the physical, the worst thing you can do is physically hurt someone. And therefore, what's morality? Well, morality is don't hurt people, be nice to people, give charity, that's material, do this. And this is all true. I'm not arguing against that. But if you looked historically, Christianity, theologically and historically, was much more interested in moral truths, not things that about the physical. So I gave this talk, and I ended up by, of course, going back to the concept of when you do that, what happens is you become a doormat Christian, because on the one hand, all you believe in is the physical, right? Like an atheist. But because you're a Christian, you're convinced that you have to do good. And so it's in a physical construct, physical paradigm. So then what does that mean? Don't judge. Don't be mean to people. Don't get in their face. Let them do whatever they want. Don't stop them. That's today's form of Christianity. And of course, I argued that Christians, what they need to do in the context of this conference, which was about Christian revival, is to actually stand up boldly and unapologetically for their faith, like all the other people do, including especially Muslims, because the truth matters. Okay. And as their forefathers, as Europe's forefathers did. And again, the point about truth, here's the irony. If you believe in something, if you're a Christian, you supposedly believe in some truths, right? Theological truths. But it won't do just to sit around and say, hey, I believe in, John 3:16, God loved the whole world, that he gave his only begotten son, that whoever believes in him shall be saved. Okay. Yeah, that's one verse, but there's a lot of other verses that really kind of give a lot of deep context to that, okay, so that it doesn't stand alone. And what I'm saying is, if you believe in the theology of Christianity, for example, the real theology, which most people don't even understand, and we're going to look at some verses actually very soon to give you an idea of what I'm referring to. But if you do, one second here. Right. If you do, and then you still see the world from a material paradigm, well, then it all coalesces. Your Christian theology just coalesces into being nice to people, like I was saying. Okay. And then you become a doormat, and there is no more truth. Yeah. Because if here's an interesting topic. People are going to find this a little weird. If Muslims are radical and they're intolerant, and we know this. And if you go to the Muslim world, of course, it's true. And for example, all throughout the Middle East, which used to be indigenously Christian, and there's still pockets of Christians, mostly in Egypt, of course, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and other countries. But they're suppressed. They're laid low as dhimmis. Okay, they're barely giving a measure of tolerance. Now, there's a logic to that kind of thing, and it's actually logical. Muslims say, well, we have the truth, don't we? We're Muslims. We believe in Islam. Islam is the truth. Haven't we all agreed to that? As such, why should we cater to or empower or certainly give equal rights to people who follow a falsehood, namely Christianity or Judaism or any other religion? Okay. That would be how a Muslim would think. And I think that's rather logical, actually. You know who else thought this way? Christians, historically. Okay. Historically, Christians thought the same exact way. Okay. We have the truth, Christianity. We need to spread it. We need people to embrace it. And Muslims, they wouldn't even call them Muslims for the longest time, to just like these. Okay. So for example, let me tell you this, the Islamic State, ISIS, and radical Muslims, when they talk about Christians and non-Muslims, they use very generic words. Okay, just kind of like they don't even, for Christians, they won't call them Masihiyin. They'll call them Nasara, because that's what the Quran calls them. But they don't even recognize them as religions. Okay, they are just deluded people. Okay, and we're Muslims. We have the truth, and these people, whatever they believe, who cares? It's wrong because it's not what we believe, and therefore, they get whatever measure of tolerance we give them, whether they're people of the book or not, et cetera, et cetera. Historically, that's actually how Christians thought too, because it's rational and logical. So they didn't even know. A lot of people would mock Christians in medieval era, scholars today, and they'll tell you that, yeah, they didn't even know what Islam was. Well, there's a reason for that, because to them, Islam was just either a heresy of Christianity or just something not worth my time, because they're wrong. I know that. They don't believe in Jesus Christ. They don't believe in the faith. They don't believe in the Bible. Okay, they're wrong. That's how it was seen. So it's kind of interesting, because now we all have been bred on the idea of, well, you have to be religiously tolerant. I mean, that sounds good, right? I agree. We should be religiously tolerant. I'm not out to kill anyone or, suppress anyone's rights or make you a dhimmi or a second-class citizen or any of that sort of thing. However, something interesting happens when we say this, which we do collectively. When we say that all religions are equal, everyone has a right. In and of itself, it's an implicit admission that no religion is correct, including my own. Have you ever thought about it that way? When a society or a people, let's say a Christian, let's say Pope Francis, as he was fond of doing, goes out of their way and says something like, all religions lead to God, or all religions are correct in their own way, and et cetera, right? What you've really said is no religion is correct. That's what it means. Okay, so once you open, so anyone, whether especially, it makes sense if you're an atheist or a secularist or whatever, and you say these things. I get it, because you don't care, because it all doesn't matter to you. So everyone should have their rights. Just don't bother me. But if you're a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or a Hindu or a Buddhist, arguably, it's kind of odd to say that, yeah, your religion is fine. Go for it. Practice it. Because I thought you had the truth. Let's say let's say you're a Christian. I'm a Christian. I have the truth. Why am I promoting what you believe in, which is inherently false because it contradicts what I believe in? So you see, my point is that religious tolerance is nice and all, but when you put it in context, those who are tolerant are also, in a way, admitting that they don't believe in anything, and they're saying everything is the same. They're relativists. All right. Now I'm going off on a tangent again. I'm diverging from my notes, but I think this is important because it helps understand also the Islamic mindset, which is completely contrary. And like I said, it's contrary, but they're more logically consistent. When a Muslim says, I believe in the Quran and the Sunnah and the Hadith, I believe in Islam, ABC, okay? And therefore, I don't support non-Muslims in their beliefs because they're wrong. Why should I congratulate them during their, Christmas or Easter when it's complete, blasphemy against the true God, Allah? That is logically consistent. Now, if you're a Christian and you say, well, I believe in the Bible and God and Jesus and the Trinity and the resurrection and et cetera, but then you say, and you, Muslim, yeah, what you believe is perfectly fine. You have all the same rights as me and et cetera, and go for it. The Muslim sees that as you don't believe in what you believe, okay? And it's kind of hard to argue with him, all right? Now, I don't know what my point is, but this just came to my mind, and I was talking about Doormat Christianity and the talk that I gave as part of a panel, and but it was just I'm just offering it to you as a bit of context because I think it's important that we always see things how others see it, and our way is not necessarily always the right way or the good way. It raises questions. Historically, Christians did not do this. They were tolerant in that, yeah, you can have your faith. I'm not going to kill you. I'm not going to do this to you. But yeah, you're doing something wrong. You're following the wrong faith because I have the true faith. All right. That is, again, logically consistent, like the Muslim. It's the tolerance thing it's not that it's logically inconsistent. It just belies what the tolerant person really believes, which is nothing. Because if he really believed in what he believed, he would not advocate and promote other people believing other things. The only reason he does that is because he's obviously not sure about his own faith or his own belief, and he's a relativist. Anyway, all right, let's just park that for now. Maybe we'll come back to it and talk about it. Now, during my talk at this conference, and I'm talking about morality, and I talked about sexuality and sin and God's wrath, et cetera, and Christians need to stop being doormats and all this sort of thing. And then while I was talking in front of this large crowd, you have to understand something about me. When I talk or when I go places, I'm not necessarily cognizant of what this place is all about, who these people are all about. I don't do a research but anyway, long story short, this was the Anglican church where I was speaking. And as I was ranting and raving at the podium about doormat Christians and looking at the audience, it's slowly starting to dawn on me, who this audience was. It was the doormat Christians themselves. No, but they were all actually very nice people. I had a very happy time with them. And but their theology was the doormat sort of thing. Okay. And I'm going to show you a little evidence of that right now. But it dawned on me that oftentimes when I talk about this, a lot of Christian groups, whoever, Protestants or Catholics or Orthodox, will like it and agree. And what happened at this talk is I got the customary applause and I left. But afterwards, a lot of people individually came up to me, kind of clandestinely, telling me that was the best talk. That was great. I loved it. You said everything I wanted to say. But they were also very careful that no one saw them. All right. Because, they didn't want to appear to leave the mainstream and appear like they were agreeing. So my point is, I think it resonated with a lot of people. And why shouldn't it? It's the truth. But at the same time, because of the nature of this particular group or denomination, which has a great affinity to Doormat Christianity, a lot of them were also a little bit reticent and kind of wanted to keep it to themselves. All right. That was an interesting quote. Now, I'm going to show you a quick video. You may have seen it. I've excerpted it. It's an excerpt. It's short. It's a short, literally. And one woman asked me a question. Well, actually, I don't know. What happened is after I gave my talk, I was part of a panel. We each went up, spoke for a few minutes, and we all sat down. During the panel, this woman asked the following question, which I thought was kind of geared towards me, which is why I responded. But we'll get into it. So here it is. Let's watch it.
Without wanting to sound too controversial, are we not being terribly arrogant, thinking that somehow we, rather than God, can change the mood in this country? The one thing I haven't heard someone say is all the movements of the spirits have come from the edges. Wesleyan, when we famously had revival, it's actually about listening to God and asking him how we should move, rather than us having all these theories about what's going to happen next. I don't know how that looks like in the Anglican communion, but I would suggest that all of us in the communion of saints would be doing well to really listen to God's call. And actually, if we did, that might happen again, that revival.
I sympathize very much with what you say, but I'm reminded of the old adage, God helps those who help themselves. And so on the one hand, it's also very vague, and it sounds pious and it's very appealing, and I'm not against it. But it also, that kind of thinking can lead to a lot of social paralysis, which I think has been going on actually for quite many decades. So I think it's a symbiotic relationship, as it always is with God. Okay, maybe of course God starts and initiates, but you have to work with him. So I'm all for listening to God, but I also don't think that should not become a sort of call to just being inactive and paralyzed and just waiting for God to take care of everything. In fact, I think that's the idea that to a certain degree has led us to where we are. All right. Okay. All right, you saw and heard that. Now, let me elaborate what I was saying, and also what she was saying. And to be clear, so this is interesting. It sounds like she's kind of promoting Doormat Christianity, and we're gonna get into that. But apparently, she came up to me after the talk. When a person gives a talk, oftentimes the audience members come and start talking with them. And she came and talked to me, and I didn't know it was her until someone later told me. And she was saying, I don't remember, but something to the effect that I think she was trying to say, I agree with you, but I was talking about something else. So just to be clear, I don't know. She may have actually been talking to someone else on that panel. And, so be that as it may, whatever their case may be, she was a nice person. And I'm not using this to pick on her. I'm just using this sort of as a paradigm, because you hear this often. And, I saw the comments from all of you on that video, this clip we just saw. And a lot of you, I think, agree with me that it seemed to be promoting a sort of, doormat Christianity mentality. So, all right. Anyway, so I'm not attacking her, but let's just go with this concept. So first of all, taking the initiative is never arrogance, okay? And acting, right? And this is what I mean when I hear someone tells me, shouldn't we be listening to God? Hey, maybe I'm dull of heart. I don't know what that means. Honestly, I mean, what does that mean? Listen to a voice in my head? Well, my head is crowded with, I think, my own voice and my own thoughts. How do you decipher if it's God's? It seems very subjective and mystical, and I like to be objective. Moreover, I think we already have his word, right? It's called the Bible. So I'm not going to sit around waiting to listen and hear a voice, whatever that means. And how do you do that on a national level? We're talking about a revival, right? A Christian revival. Are we all supposed to collectively sit and wait to hear God's voice? So yeah, this kind of mystical, talk, I don't know what that means, and I know that makes me sound like dull of heart and maybe not a true Christian, but okay, whatever. But like I said, I know what the Bible says, which is the word of God that was delivered to man, and we can go at that. And what does it say? Well, of course, you might not be surprised that the Old Testament is full of verses that promote and advocate for action. Okay. Deuteronomy 28:8. The Lord will send a blessing on your barns and on everything you put your hand to, right? Get to work, put your hand, and God will bless it. Ecclesiastes 9:10. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. Don't wait around and say, well, wait, I'm waiting to hear what God tells me. All right. Proverbs 12:11. He who works his land will have abundant food, but he who chases fantasies lacks judgment. Chases fantasies. Is that like waiting to hear a voice from God? I don't know. Again, I'm not picking on that particular woman. I'm just, I've heard a lot of people use this terminology, waiting on God, listening to God. And I don't know. I'm out. I don't know what that means. I've checked out of that. Okay. Proverbs 12:24. The hand of the diligent will rule, but the slothful will be put to forced labor. Good stuff. All right. And here's a famous one that I remember when I was a kid because it sort of applied to me. Proverbs 6:10-12. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands, and poverty will come on you like a bandit, and scarcity like an armed man. So you can see all these verses in the Old Testament are clearly praising active, not passive men and women. Okay. But you're going to tell me, yeah, but that's the Old Testament. What about the New Testament? Guess what? The New Testament is even more adamant about these sentiments. Here's one for you. If anyone is not willing to work, Paul says bluntly, let him not eat. Okay, that's 2 Thessalonians 3:10. He doesn't say, wait till God tells you how you should secure a living. No, he says, he insists that if you don't pull your own weight, you should starve. Now, how does this work in the context of, let's say, all the millions of migrants in Europe who get free aid, who come there specifically to get free food and free shelter, and they don't work? Paul would be saying they should starve. The saint who wrote a big chunk of the New Testament. All right. That's what he says. He even goes so far as to insist that, quote, if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for his immediate family, what happens? He has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. This is in 1 Timothy 5:8. Think about what's being said here, okay? And how this completely contradicts what we think we know about Christianity. If you, as a man, are not taking care of your people and especially your family, you're not a Christian. You're an infidel. You're going to hell. Wait, but I thought all I had to do is repeat some formula, John 3:16, and that's it, and just be nice to everyone and I'm saved. No, that's not what Paul's saying. Okay? He's saying if you don't do action and take care of your people, you're worse. You've abandoned, you've denied the faith. That's the word. You've denied Christianity, and you're worse than an unbeliever. You're worse than the Muslim. You're worse than the pagan. Okay? That's not my words. Go check it out. It's in the Bible. It just always interests me how people, they seem to have this idea that the New Testament is just all love and lovey-dovey. Just, let's all be happy and forgive and just get along. And I'm sorry, it's not like that. If you actually take the time to read it, all right. What the problem is, too many people have in their heads a few verses which do sound like that, but they don't have the balance. Okay. And I'm reading to you the balance, and you can see it's extremely stark. Here's another one. Paul says, for we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. This is in Ephesians. Got that? So God has already paved the way. Boldly walking in what has already been prepared beforehand, instead of waiting for direct instructions and waiting to hear from God. That's not arrogance. That's actually obedience. Okay. Then there's, of course, James, good old James. And as we know, he writes, so also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. For as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also faith apart from works is dead. That's James 2:17 and 2:26. Excuse me. So what is that? So waiting on and listening to God, well, that sounds very faithful. But without works or actions, that's dead. That's pointless. That's useless. It's a carcass. Okay? But guess what? No one, believe it or not, most better underscored the concept and the need for bold initiative and action instead of fear and waiting for direct instructions than Jesus Christ himself. Go read the parable of the talents sometime, which is in Matthew and Luke. In summary, the parable is basically Jesus talks about a master, and he has 3 servants, and the master is leaving. He's going on a trip, and he's going to come back, and he distributes some of his resources to these 3 servants, each according to their abilities, the Bible says. And he gives 5, I think, and 3 and 1, something like that. 5 and 3 and 1 talent to the 3 servants, respectively. When he returns, the one who had 5, he did work with it, he invested it, and he's like, oh, look, here, I've doubled it. And the master, God, Jesus, says, well done, faithful servant, etc., etc. The second one, same thing. He had less, but he also did work, and I think he doubled it as well, something like that. And, of course, the master praises him. The third one buried it to keep it safe, didn't work with it, didn't invest, didn't double it or anything, but he had the same amount that was given to him. And why did he do that? Because he was afraid of acting without being given precise instructions from the master. What is the master? What is God? What does Jesus say to him? He calls him a wicked and lazy servant, and he casts him out into outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is Matthew chapter 25. And as we know, weeping and gnashing of teeth in outer darkness, well, that's a reference to hell. So this man who, instead of doing something, decided he kept it. He didn't lose what the master gave him. But instead of taking action and being timid and waiting, apparently, to get direct, exact instructions and not taking any initiative, he's being cast out into outer darkness, wailing and gnashing of teeth. He's going to hell. I think in Luke, the version's even worse. I think basically in Luke, that servant, Jesus ends up by saying, that bring them here, these people, and slaughter them in my presence. Go look it up in Luke. Again, not the image most people really have of Jesus, but this is the image that the Crusaders knew because they actually knew the whole Bible. All right. So anyway, this perfect parable of the talents, this man who was passive, his cautious passivity, this wasn't humility. This wasn't, oh, I'm waiting to listen to God in the eyes of God. It was, according to Christ, a form of evil deserving of hell. Okay? Grab your Bibles and read them sometime. Okay? Not just the fuzzy, happy verses, okay, that promote Doormat Christianity or that you think promote Doormat Christianity. They don't, of course. Anyway, the argument about listening to God, in short, it's a double-edged sword. Okay. On the one hand, it's true. Of course, when someone says, I'm listening to God, I'm waiting on God. Yeah, this could be piety and humility. I have nothing against that. I'm all for that. I don't want to go against that. But on the other hand, it can, and I think often is, misused as a pretext to justify some of humanity's absolute worst vices. Cowardice, sloth, mendacity, complacency, irresponsibility, and of course, fatalism. Fatalism is the idea that, oh, what am I going to do? It's all up to God. I'm going to wait on God. God's in charge. Okay. But it comes off as piety and humility. Okay. So all these vices, being a coward, being lazy, etc. Now you can pat yourself in the back and say, hey, I'm only doing it because I'm a good Christian. That's what God expects of me. All right. And this, to be honest with you, this is how I define this doormat Christianity business. This is at the root of all the problems right now with the West. Even if you're not a Christian, you may say, I'm not a Christian. What do I care? I don't subscribe to doormat or non-doormat Christianity. Sorry, but your entire civilization, your entire society is very much still governed by Christianity. It doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter if you don't believe in John 3:16. Your entire paradigm and epistemology is totally infused with Christianity, Christian teachings, so that you too are a doormat in this context. You too think that the greatest good is, as a materialist, the greatest good is to be nice to people and allow them to have their way and never hurt anyone, never stand in the way, and so on and so forth. And you have no morality because morality looks at metaphysical sins. And of course, as Western people, we don't acknowledge metaphysical sin. The only kind of sin we understand is physical because we're materialists, we're atheists. Okay. So I think it's very important to keep all that in mind, but also to keep in mind that, in the end, all of these words, this double-edged sword of waiting on God and listening to God, you know what they also are? They're just words. Okay. What matters is what comes out of words. Okay. If they lead to social paralysis, as I was saying in my response in that video, crippling Christians from their historic birthright, which is combating evil and allowing all sorts of depravities to run roughshod on Christians, as in the current case, then they're not words of or from God. Rest assured. Okay. These are words and ideas and constructs that only help evil disseminate and spread and overwhelm. So, by all means, like I said, let Christians be humble and engage in humility and act in humility and never embrace arrogance. I'm not advocating for that at all, but act nonetheless, right? That's what we've seen. How do you get by these, verses that I just shared with you, especially the one of Christ and the parable of the talents, where the man who didn't do anything because he was fearful, but he kept what he had, goes to hell. Or where Paul says, if you don't take care of your family's physical needs and feed them, you're an infidel. You deserve hell too. It's just interesting to me how these verses, Bible-believing Christians just never seem to read or understand their purport. It's always just about turning the other cheek and being nice and being the doormat. And when you come across verses like this, it just strikes me like this is completely different than doormat Christianity. All right, let's this is part one. We're going to check now. We're going to talk about what happened in London, but let's see what you have to say. Get on Joe Rogan's and Tucker Carlson's podcast. All right, we'll do. Leo Wolf the Red. I told my dog he's haram and Muslims don't like him. Now he's got Crusader armor on and is barking about Constantinople, Jerusalem, and Reconquista. Well, good for him. Good job. Arabic no longer impresses us. Let's hear some Copt. Oh, you're talking to me? I'm not trying to impress you when I throw out Arabic words. I'm just trying to edify you with the truth. But yeah, you know what? I actually do plan. The ideas are endless. There's just no time. But I do want to plan and make a video wholly dedicated to Coptic Christianity, its history. Of course, there's going to be a lot of Islam involved, but it's actually a rich history in and of itself with a lot of interesting facts and tidbits that most people don't know. So, all right, maybe I'll throw out some Coptic soon enough. Christina, if Muslims are taught to lie to Christians, non-Muslims, and even after generations of converting, they were still teaching hatred to people of the book, how can we trust any Muslim? Well, that's the great conundrum, isn't it? Christina here is referring, she probably heard me or read in one of my books about all the many times that Muslims historically engaged in taqiyya and other forms of deceit, lying to the infidel. And the most prominent example I often give is towards the end of the Reconquista in Spain, when Granada was the final bastion of Islam in the Iberian Peninsula. Long story short, the Christians told the Muslims, because of what they were doing, you either convert or leave. And the idea was, this wasn't we're intolerant, bigoted Christians, because the same Christians had earlier said you can keep your religion. Okay, we don't care. Just, live as good citizens. But they, of course, by keeping their religion, always tried to subvert the nation, engage in jihad when they could, were helping foreign Muslims like the Ottomans and the Barbary pirates and so forth. So the Christians of Spain concluded, all right, the only way these people can ever live in peace with us is if they become like us. Hence, become a Christian or leave. Okay, that was the logic. So they all became Christian overnight because a fatwa came out saying, yeah, do it in the context of taqiyya, which means you can do whatever they want you to do, just as long as you keep in your heart that hatred and contempt for the old infidel and do whatever you can to help subvert Spain back to Islam, you're good. So 500,000 Grenadans became Christian, got baptized, went to church, celebrated Mass, partook of the communion, and this went on for generations. Literally, we have about 100 years later, we have accounts of people saying, the son, the grandson, the great-grandson, all born, raised as Catholics, but at home they were still Muslims, plotting how to take over and how to kill the Christians. Okay, so yeah, how can you trust a people who have this doctrine that's part of the religion, and it's manifested and flared out historically on multiple occasions? I just gave you the most prominent and famous one, okay, but it's in other contexts. And of course, at the same time, this is what they did when they were really put to the test and told you better convert. Europe, the West is not going to do anything like that. There's no religious test, okay? So if those Muslims back then were able to go that far, and if today's Westerners are not even going to challenge or test them in any way, shape, or form, what do you think is going to happen? They don't even have to try. They don't even have to try to conceal, okay? So, yeah, that's the inherent problem, I think, with a religion that teaches deception as a virtue, as long as it's helping the religion. Hello, Raymond. Hi. I argued with Grok about whether Ottomans stuffed King Louis II of Hungary with hay after Mohawks. He denied it now, but confirmed it before. I'm confused. What really happened? Yeah, he was stuffed with, even worse happened, actually. Mohawks was a really savage battle. It's when Hungary, of course, after resisting the Ottomans for so long, finally fell to them under Suleiman the Great. I forget the date. I want to say 1520-ish. But all sorts of atrocities. I remember they also made a mountain of Christian heads, and of course, yeah, stuffing the king. But what the greater point, of course, is that AI lies, and they're easy to catch in their lies if you know what you're talking about. If you saw, I did a live stream, and there's a little video where I took one of these AIs to task about a particular thing they were telling me. It was about Ireland. They were saying that this young idealistic sultan went out of his way to help the poor Irish during their potato famine. Okay, and it was all purely altruistic because there was a video somewhere on social media. And I asked one of these AI, you can see it in the video, is this true? And it was like, yeah, this was a great sultan. He was very altruistic, good man. And I was like, are you sure it was just altruism? And they said, yeah. I mean, what do you mean? Let me just remove this. And it said, yeah, of course it was. But then I kept pushing back. And if you've seen this, AI likes to say, you're right to push back. You've made a good point. Long story short, and I asked it in percentages. I would ask it like, okay, tell me percent-wise, how much was this sincere altruism and how much was it, let's say, realpolitik to win over, let's say, British aid during the Crimean War against Russia. And initially, it said it was like 95% just genuine altruism, maybe 5%, a little bit realpolitik. I kept pushing and bringing up quotes and evidence, and then finally basically said, yeah, it was 95% cynical, cold business, realpolitik, and maybe 5% or less, I think it said, altruism. Okay. So that's the thing with these AIs. They, of course, lie and try to stick to the narrative. But if you know what you're talking about, and most people don't, then you can challenge it and expose it. Lies destroy lives. Raymond, I think you believe people should have freedom to believe what they want to believe, and the state should not punish views which it regards as false. I think you will believe if we have true freedom of speech, Christianity will come out on top. Yeah, I wasn't trying to say that we shouldn't have freedom of religion or freedom of speech. My point was a larger, more philosophical point when I was talking about how what it means when someone says, yeah, you're okay. So there's two ways of doing this. There's, okay, I'm a Christian. I believe that this is the truth, and you're not. Let's say you're a Muslim. Okay. Now there's two ways I can see this. One is, okay, I know I'm right. I know you're wrong, but I'm not going to force you to do anything. If you want to believe, you can believe and do what you want. Okay. I'm for that. I don't argue against that. The argument I'm trying to make is what it means in our head when we actually think this way, as opposed to the way I just dissected it by showing you, look, I know what I believe. I know you're wrong, but I'm giving you your you should have your free rights to believe it. Okay. That's not what most people do nowadays. What they do is they don't just say you have your right to believe. They basically make it sound like, yeah, and you're right. Your belief is just as valid as mine. Okay. That's the problem, because when you do that, you have just basically abnegated your own faith. You've just said, I don't believe in anything. And Muslims see that, by the way. And Muslims don't do that. Okay. So it's one thing. Well, Muslims actually do this. They do give a right to non-Muslims to have their faith. We know about it. It's called the dhimmi system, right? You can be a Christian, you can be a Jew, you can live under Islam, and you can practice your faith. Okay, you have to pay tribute, you have to be a second-class citizen, et cetera, et cetera. It's not an enviable lot, all right? But they do allow that, okay? But what they don't do is publicly and tell you, oh yeah, your faith is, mine's no better than yours. Yours is just as good. Yours is going to get you to heaven just like mine. They don't do that. And that's what I'm talking about. And Christians should not do that, okay? Because if you do that, now you've just exposed yourself as not even being a believer, honestly. That's what that means. Because if you truly believe in your faith, then you will want people to come to your faith. You will not, pat them on the back and say, yeah, go your way. That's great. It's just as good. No, that's like a cynical, indecisive kind of worldview. So that's what I was talking about. I'm all for people. I'm not out to molest anyone because they don't believe what I believe. I think everyone should have the right to believe whatever they want. However, that doesn't mean I'm going to come and pat them in the back and say, that's great. It's the same thing with sexuality. Okay. I'm not out to, some of you may have heard me speak critically of not just crazy LGBT, but just standard homosexuality. And yeah, it's true. I feel that way about it. Does that mean I'm going to go and force and attack and, no, you can't be a homosexual? No, they can do whatever they want. Okay. But I and society should not go out of our way and say, this is great, and promote it and pat you on the back. Okay. Because I have a belief, which is that it's immoral. All right. But I believe you have your right to do what you want. So you see the difference? The difference there's between, yeah, I'm giving you your rights and I'm agreeing with you. Okay. I'm all for giving people their rights, but don't drag me into it and make me complicit with it, whatever it is, whether it's Islam or another religion or, sexual orientations and whatnot. So that's what I'm talking about. All right. Quavades. Thank you. Leowolf the Red comes back. Faith without works is dead. Doormat Christians don't do the work. By the way, my dog has chosen to be a hospitaler. Well, good for him. Hey, you know, when I was in London, I got to visit the Priory of St. John, a hospitaler building in London, because they used to have priories and command buildings where the military orders would raise resources and manpower. And I got to see that, and I bought myself a little statue of a hospitaler. Pretty excited about that. All right. Kevin, I'm no theologian, but I think listen to God means studying Scripture and the Fathers, not peering into the sky and listening. God bless, Mr. Ibrahim. Well, yeah, I mean, that's the whole point. I don't, you know, it's so vague. I'm tired of this like mystical, vague stuff. Oh, I'm listening to God, and you know, I don't know what that means. Okay, and like I said, maybe I'm just such a bad Christian. You know, I'm not in tune, but you know, or maybe I'm just too mistrusting of myself. I don't know. You know, the thoughts that I hear, are they? I'm not going to attribute these thoughts to God. I could if I want. Maybe some of them seem to be like that. I don't know, but I'd rather err on the side of caution. And like I said, we already have His Word, don't we? So why is He going to make special messages that I'm going to sit around waiting to hear? Yeah. Lies destroy lives. That's a really cool name, by the way. And I think I've said that before. Raymond is right. Thank you. Listening to hear God's voice does not mean doing nothing while we wait. George MacDonald wrote a poem about listening and hearing God's voice called Willie's Question. You told me that, and I read it, and I liked it. Thank you. The Lady Dixon. I have all 3 of your books on Audible. I love them. Praise God, and thank you so much. What do you think about the Ethiopian Bible versus the King James Version? Well, that's a deep topic. The Ethiopian Bible, for those who don't know, is very old, and it's a much larger canon. It has the Book of Enoch in it, which talks of all the fallen angels who mated with human women and begat giants. Really exciting stuff. I'm fond of reading the Book of Enoch and lots of the other apocryphal books. You know, it all comes, and this here we go again. You know, it comes down to counsels and decisions by men. There was actually, I mean, so yes, this Book of Enoch and others. There's the Book of Jubilees, and there's so many other books that are in the Ethiopian Bible, which is much bigger and older than the King James Version, of course. How did they get lost? Why did they get removed? Well, these were the councils. Okay. You know, even the Book of John or the Gospel of John, actually, many people don't realize, which is, you know, one of the most beloved of the Gospels, probably the most, actually, of the 4 Gospels. There was a time where it wasn't part of the canon, and there was a lot of debate about not putting it in. So, which, by the way, has always made me find something interesting. So, Protestants say the Bible's Word of God, and we're going to go with this, and that's it. But you know, but who determined that this book is the Word of God? It was actually those Catholics and Orthodox meeting in the councils. And like I said, 1 year this book would be in, 1 year this book would be out. And so it was a man-made collation and collection, whether you like it or not. So I find it interesting that Protestants look at the Bible, King James, as it is, and think this is now God gave it to us like this, when there was a whole long process, when some of those books were not in it before, some got added later, some were removed, like the Book of Enoch, which was earlier on, for example, part of it. You know, this was the actions of these councils and church fathers. So it's funny, on the one hand, they take that as like immaculate, it's from God. On the other hand, they look at those guys like, well, who are these crazy Catholics and Orthodox and, you know, church fathers? Well, who, I don't trust them. But they're the ones who actually gave you your Bible, and they were men. So I always found that a little bit of an interesting irony. Anyway, let me move on before I get in trouble again. Augustus Alexander. Hey, Raymond. Hey, I'm a new fan of yours, and I just wanted to ask if you'd ever go in depth on the psychological impact of the fall of the Ottoman Empire and losing the Caliph had on the Ummah. Yeah, that's not bad. That's a good topic, actually. I mean, offhand, I can say it had a traumatic impact because it was actually the one thing that really caused so much of the Muslim world to lose faith in Islam and be westward looking during the colonial era. And it didn't help that the Ottoman Empire, which was the scourge of the West, was the first one to westernize. It abolished the caliphate, the sultanate in the 1920s, both of them. And, under Ataturk, as we know, went into this massive modernization campaign, trying to emulate Europe any way we can, including by the way they dress, no beards, no hijabs. So I think the initial impact was complete loss of faith in Islam. Islam's no longer helping me out. It's not bringing me gain. It's not making my life better. So why should I care about it? Because it was inherently always about that. It was not a spiritual thing. So once Islam couldn't help the Muslim, well, they became very westward looking, believe it or not, until the West became, I don't know, eastward looking and started hating itself in the 60s and so forth and pushing Muslims back, into Islam and contempt for it, which is really the topic we're engaged in right now. Flippy. Thoughts on Korean protesters launching pork at mosques in Korea? Has this happened? I'm usually disconnected from world events, but why are Koreans launching pork at mosques? Is this South Korea? I assume. I don't think North Korea would allow Muslims. Well, anyway, thanks for bringing that to my attention. It sounds like something I should actually investigate. Is it true that croissants are victory pastries? Yes, they are actually. And croissants related to cross. And you'd be surprised when you look at European Western culture and all these minor little things that we take for granted, and you find they go back to some symbolic event with Islam, a victory, for example, the ringing of the church bells on noon. Did you know that goes back to a war with Islam, the siege of Belgrade? I want to say in 1456, I think, where it was pretty horrific. John Hunyadi. I wrote a lot about this in my John Hunyadi chapter in Defenders of the West, chapter 6. But anyway, long siege. The Christians fought against the odds. It was the peasant crusaders came to the fore because the nobles had run off, and they prevailed. And the Pope at the time initiated the ringing of the noon bells to mark that particular victory. So everywhere you look, it's just interesting. You'll find that things that you would think are not connected to actually are connected to the West's long struggle with Islam. Parlock. Thoughts on people who think Europe would have been stronger if it remained pagan? Yeah, that's like the Edward Gibbon thesis. He claimed that Rome fell after it embraced Christianity because Christianity was inherently doormatish and weak. Okay. The problem with that thesis is that, it can't be proven. First of all, empires rise and fall all the time, irrespective of if the religion changes or not. So that's one thing. But we also know that after the Roman Empire, you had Christian peoples who were pretty not passive doormats, okay? The precursors to the Crusaders, the Normans, the Franks themselves, okay? They were able to create the societies they did, and they were able to go on the offensive against Islam the way they did, and yet they were Christians. So what do we make of that? They beat the pagans. They defeated them. Again, if you watch movies, Hollywood, of course, loves to glamorize and heroize the pagans and make the Christians look like, just weak and pathetic and just all crying and running around with crosses. Okay, but who really won in the end? Well, it was the Christians. Who ended up submitting to and embracing the religion of the other? It was the Vikings and the pagans who became Christian. Why was that? Well, because they lost and they came to believe in it as well. But they lost in the sense that it's not like, why couldn't the Vikings just beat the Christians? Because even though they were Christians, the others, the Europeans, they were strong, they were fierce, they were fighters. So that's my point. I don't think just being Christian does not inherently make you a doormat. However, the heresy that's under discussion right now is a real heresy. And as all heresies, of course, they do have a grounding in the religion. The issue is Christianity, unlike Islam and other religions, is a religion of peace and love and turning the other cheek. So that's not a lie. The lie is pulling that out of its context, stripping it of all balance, and making the religion itself just about that. That's doormat Christianity. That's the heresy that dominates the 21st century. Okay. But those things in and of themselves, peace, love, tolerance, they're great, but you have to put them in balance with everything else. And this is what I'm saying. It's ridiculous to think that the teachings of Christ, especially after the verses I just gave you, but that they're all about, trying to convince everyone to just lay down, never resist, just, let people walk all over you. No, sorry. That would be masochistic. That would not be very masculine or manly. And God is a man of war. God made man to be the way man is. All right. It would be really weird if God made me the way I am, and then the whole message from God to me is, please become a woman. Please don't, these impulses I put in you about, I don't know, fairness and justice and protecting the weak. Please don't do that. Just lay down and let everyone walk all over you. If that was, I don't know. I just don't think that's what God would ask of a man after he made a man the way a man is, or a way a man should be. So there it is. Canadian, eh? I was hoping you could briefly address the Red-Green Alliance and the connection between radical Islam and Marxism as it pertains to their mutual goal of subverting Western principles. Cheers. I have addressed that on multiple occasions, but I'll briefly address it now, which is it's a real thing. Okay, so Islam is the obvious attack. It's the good thing about Islam is you can see it for what it is. It doesn't hide. Islam, only engages in subterfuge and tries to subvert when it has no choice. But once it feels strong, it lets you know exactly how it feels. So that's a good thing. The left, of course, is the big liar. And why are they allies? Well, they actually believe in exact opposite things, but they're allies because they both really hate the truth, which is Christian civilization as expressed in the West, historically at least, even though it's waning now. And so they're both at war against it. Doesn't, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So that's why you get these leftists who are all about, extreme tolerance, LGB, whatever, rights and all that. And then they go out of their way to help and support and empower Muslims who, once they get a chance, kick them in the butt, as they should. I always give that one particular example, Hamtramck in Michigan, I believe, where the leftists made sure to help welcome all the Muslims in. And once the Muslims became the majority of the city council, the first thing they did is cancel Pride Week or month or whatever, much to the chagrin of the Pride people. So, yeah, they don't like each other. Muslims, to their credit, don't like the left. The left is just stupid and is willing to believe in anything and support anyone as long as it goes against traditional mores. But anyway. Burning Ferris wheel. Can you please shed some light on about Hindus fighting Islamic expansion and how we can work together to tackle this satanic cult in future? Hindus fighting Islamic expansion. I don't think you mean historically. Are you talking about in the now? Is India preventing Pakistan from spreading into India? I don't know. I'm not being facetious. Did something happen that I don't know about that's going on? I do know, of course, Hindus and Muslims have fought for eons, and that Hindus are staunchly against Islam, including now many of them. Good for them. And so, can we work together? Sure, of course we can. You can be a Christian or a Jew or a Hindu. If it's the same enemy, it goes back to what I was talking about. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. So yeah, I see no reason why we could not work together humanely and positively to defang Islam. Hurt in the steadfast. Member for a month. Hey, thanks for joining. Hope all is well with you and yours. It is, thank you. Reciprocated to you, friend. Constantine, 312, member for 2 months. Finished Two Swords of Christ. I was thinking to myself, this can be Hollywood gold. Did you hear Mel Gibson is doing a series on the Battle of Malta? I did hear that from many people, all of them telling me I need to be somehow his consultant, seeing that I wrote a lot about the Siege of Malta, which I'm happy to do, but the kind of guy that I am, I don't know anything about the first thing about how to reach such a luminous star as a Mel Gibson and try to be part of that. But thanks for the thought. Pop the kettle on love, member for 1 month. Very late to this one. I can't help but feel once the government in UK hears of him, he will be banned. You've lost me, friend. Hears of who? I forgot. Maybe it's someone I was talking about, probably. Lyrith of Valthier. Thanks for all your hard work. You think there may be those in EU and UK that may be trying to use the resilience of Islam base to combat, balance out economically and morally corrupt extreme woke ideology? I don't think so. I mean, that would be a very convoluted way. I think what you're asking is, are there people in the EU and the UK who are against leftist woke ideology? And so instead of confronting it head on, they bring Islam to do their dirty work for them. Talk about a convoluted and problematic way that's not going to end up really good for you. How about you just stop it yourself? So I don't know, but I don't think that's what they're doing. I don't think they care. I think they are the source of wokeness, woke ideology. Pop the kettle on love. Do you think you will be banned from the UK? Maybe, but I think I've seen enough, as it were. So I won't be too upset if I am. But I would imagine, yeah, probably. The things I hear about the UK and people who get banned and people who basically get arrested because they said the wrong thing. Yeah, I could very much see myself being banned from there. By my question, I am theorizing on how policymakers may be seeing resilient Islam as a way to resist the effects of cultural promotion of abortion, child mutilation, surgeries. Yeah. Okay. So I think I did understand what you're asking. And my answer remains the same, which is, why can't they do it themselves? You're the government. You're in power. You're the host society. Why don't you put an end to woke madness? Why bring in this wild alien entity that isn't content with annihilating wokeism, but it also wants to subjugate anyone and everyone who's not a Muslim? So again, it's if that's what they're doing, that would be really stupid. Which then again, maybe they are, because they are fools. Mad Monkey. Hey, thanks for joining. Mad Monkey. Good name. Herodotus. What do you think about the new deportation and detention plan passed by the EU Parliament? Not much, because it's new and I don't know about it. You'll have to give me some details. It sounds promising, the deportation and detention plan. Okay. Sounds like they're getting serious with the migrant issue. Well, so I think that's a good start. Yeah, I'll have to look into that one. Rafi, what is the best way for Christians in the West to help our persecuted brethren other than prayer and financial support to charities? Okay, well, prayer is the spiritual help, financial is the material help. You can convince your governments to do something about it. It's often a lot easier than you think. Not the convincing part, but imagine if the US, for example, or any European country that gives all this aid to any Muslim nation that's persecuting its Christians. All I have to say is, look, you better improve their lot. You better stop this, jihad and persecution, or we are not giving you, or we're reducing our aid. I think that would instantaneously fix it, because the governments themselves, who are more cynical than radical, are not going to want to lose the money, and they'll do whatever needs doing to safeguard these few infidels. So that's always been an untapped but very important, I think, strategy that some people know about, but isn't necessarily being pursued. So that would be one of them, I guess. Ketgale, I would like to see a accurate depiction of the conquest of Mexico by Cortez and how the Spanish stopped the Aztecs from murdering tens of thousands to devils. Hollywood would never make it, right? Right. You and me both. We'd like to see that. But Hollywood does not exist to show us true history. It doesn't even exist to show us good stories. I've already pointed out many times that, let's say in my book, Defenders of the West, or The Two Swords of Christ, which really looks at inspiring and heroic battles, a lot of these, as you read them from the primary sources, are much more impressive than anything that Hollywood comes up with, which is all fake. And this was real, but they won't do it. Why? The story's there. It's written for you. And you can even boast and say, true story. They won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. Why? Because it goes against the narrative. Hollywood's not there just to entertain you and get your money. It's there to condition you and, impact your mind and socially engineer you. Did you not know this? So a story like that, we're not going to have Christians like the good guys or Christians fighting back, heaven forbid. What? Hollywood's going to promote the opposite of doormat Christianity? No way. So that's the problem. Same thing with the Aztec Cortez business that you mentioned. That would go against the grain. Of course, the Europeans are all evil colonizers and genociders and whatnot. And the natives are all peaceful, loving Pocahontas types, right? So why would they ever do that? Scarlet Rose. Hi, Raymond. Hi. I believe the problem is people don't study the original texts. They pick and choose a popular verse and expound on that, not knowing context. I agree. Drives me crazy. My church calls doormat Christians pew potatoes. All right, I think we're on the same page, Scarlett. I agree completely. That's the problem. I think this is really the chief problem with Christianity today, which is that, and I get it mostly from those who insist to me, I'm a Bible-believing Christian, okay? And then you find by that they mean they believe in like 10 verses, and their whole life is always quoting those verses and not realizing that there's like 100,000 more verses that actually qualify what you say you believe. So, and to their credit, historical Christians, including the Knights of the Temple and the hospital, they actually read the whole Bible, believe it or not. And that's why they would know, of course, the verses of peace and love and tolerance, and they would talk about them. That's the whole purpose that the Hospitallers came into being. They would, one of their prayers was they would call our lords the sick. So the sick people that they would heal, Hospitallers, so it's like a hospital, they refer to them as their lords and masters. But at the same time, there were fierce warriors. Why? Because they took the entire Bible's message, not just picked and choose the parts that make Christians weak. All right. All right. Herodotus, what are your thoughts on traditional Protestant doctrines such as Sturgis, Calvinism, and Luther's theses? I'm not going to get into this too deeply because that's a very deep question. Suffice to say, I think early Protestants had a lot of good points, much of which I agree with. And I'm not a fan of Calvin, though, because of his whole tulip business and the predestination. And it just makes God into something, worse than Allah, to be honest with you. So I'm not big on Calvin, but Luther's, Luther, if you look at his life and what he really believes, he wasn't, I think he would be shocked to see what Protestant churches teach today. I think he would be more in agreement with Catholic doctrine overall than today's Protestantism. So this is what I mean. Protestantism historically, I'm much more sympathetic to than modern day Protestant movements, which bear very little resemblance to their forebears. All right. Now, there's more to discuss. Okay, one last one. Z-Man, thank you for all your work. You are appreciated. Thank you. All right. So I was, are you still with me? Still able to stay awake? It's pretty late where I'm at. It's almost 10 p.m. I still have pasta to go make, and ground beef and onions, my dinner. But you didn't need to know that. I'm talking to myself out loud again. Anyway, so now let's talk about the second part. I told you Doormat Christianity. I told you my talk in England and whatnot. Then, excuse me, on the 16th is when I left England. And that same day, I learned that thousands of Muslims took over London's Trafalgar Square, probably not pronouncing it right, to mark their communal breaking of Ramadan fast, okay? And a dramatic spectacle, of course, followed, including, thousands of bodies sprawled all over the street in prostration as Quran verses blared out and Allahu Akbar screamed and so forth. And of course, the mayor was there, Sadiq Khan. And for some reason or other, rather than behave like most of their countrymen, that is to say, as doormats, a number of Christians, British Christians, took umbrage at this. They dared complain. So here's one quote, for example, by Nick Timothy, Shadow Secretary of State for Justice and Shadow Lord Chancellor. He said, in reference to this Muslim takeover and spectacle of prostrations and prayers, he said, quote, "Too many are too polite to say this, but mass ritual prayer in public places is an act of domination. The adhan," this is when a Muslim goes and proclaims prayers, the call to prayer real loud. "The adhan, which declares there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger, is, when called in a public place, a declaration of domination. Perform these rituals in mosques if you wish, but they are not welcome in our public places and shared institutions. And given their explicit repudiation of Christianity, they certainly do not belong in our churches and cathedrals. The domination of public places is straight from the Islamic playbook." Wow. Now that's a mouthful, and good for you, Timothy, because everything he said just so happens to be correct. Absolutely. I mean, let's look at some of what he just said. Okay. First of all, yeah, what does the adhan declare? Think about it. All these thousands of Muslims get together, congregate in public place, Britain, London, and they start yelling, "There is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger." So what does that mean to the rest of the people in England who are Christians by background, at least, heritage, and some, of course, maybe by faith? So you have this alien host that has been invited to come, and they've been given all the rights, and they've been promoted to believe in their religion, of course, as we were talking. And now they've gone and taken over London, of course, Londonistan, where they are loudly proclaiming a truth to them that makes you, the Brits, infidels, the hated enemy. Okay? And that truth again, which the adhan declares, is that it's the shahada, the number one principle of becoming a Muslim, saying that there is no God but Allah, which means the Judeo-Christian God is all false, and Muhammad is his messenger, which means, again, you are wrong because you don't follow the words of Muhammad. Therefore, you are also false. Okay? And again, and to think that these, as Timothy was saying, as he's pointing out, it's one thing to do these in an actual mosque, but they're oftentimes invited into churches and they say these words. So you see what I was telling you when let's go back to what I was talking about. It's one thing to tell a Muslim or any faith or any person of any faith or no faith that you have this right. Yeah, I'm not going to coerce you. You can be an atheist, you can be a Muslim, you can be whatever you want. I'm not going to fight with you, and I think you should have equal civil rights as a citizen. That's one thing. It's another thing to basically advocate or promote these beliefs. And so when a church invites Muslims to come in and they start, hollering and screaming, there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger, they are implicitly telling you we're right, you're wrong. And you're sitting there allowing them in your holy place, your temple, your sacred worship site for your God to say that. You think that makes them like you, by the way? You think they look at you and, wow, you've appeased me, let me reciprocate. Or do you think they have nothing but contempt for you when you do that? Because it just validates exactly what they believe, which is you are a doormat and we're turning you into our prayer mat, as I was saying earlier. But more to the point, let's talk about historically how Muslims behaved as far as mosques and whatnot. So the first thing to keep in mind is what's a mosque? Do you know that word? Mosque, we get it with the MOSQUE. That's sort of a French transliteration of an Arabic word, masjid. Okay, so mosque means masjid. And masjid, sagad, or sajad, means to prostrate. A masjid is a place where one prostrates. That's it. Okay, so a mosque is not a building per se. Historically, when Muhammad was doing it, they didn't have buildings. They had maybe huts here and there that were built over places that Muhammad, that became his masjid, where he prostrated. But by nature, a masjid, a mosque, is just wherever Muslims congregate and pray, which is exactly what they turned London's Trafalgar Square into, right? A couple of weeks ago. Now, for those who don't understand the significance of what it means when Muslims actually congregate together and engage in mass communal prayer, does that mean is that a supremacist takeover, as Timothy and many others said? Or is that like, no, we're just, come on, tolerance, we want to pray, give us a place to pray. So let me give you an interesting anecdote. One that Muslims are very fond of sharing as a way to show you how tolerant they are. But in the current context, it's actually going to prove the opposite about what we're talking about where a Muslim prays, what happens to that place. So in the year 637, after the Muslims conquered Jerusalem, which was considered Christian land for centuries at this point, after Constantine the Great, even before him. But Caliph Omar, so the story goes, entered into Jerusalem in 637. And then he was talking to Patriarch Sophrinus. And basically Omar said, it's time for me to pray. Now, Patriarch Sophrinus, of course, knowing absolutely nothing about this new creed, which probably had not even coalesced at this point into a meaningful, coherent religion, on hearing that this pagan wants to pray, he told him, go pray in the Holy Sepulchre. Maybe you can even repent there. Okay. And then Omar refused. And he said, and he just went to a side and he prayed somewhere else. And then when he came back, he said to the Patriarch Sophrinus, he said, do you know why I didn't pray in the Holy Sepulchre? And the Patriarch said, why? And Omar said, quote, if I had prayed inside the church, you would be losing it, and it would have gone from your hands, because after my death, the Muslims would seize it, saying, Omar prayed here. And this is from a 10th century, the Annals of Nazm al-Jawzar. Now, whether this is apocryphal or not is not the point. The point is that Muslims often use this to show you how tolerant Muslims were. That, look, Omar could have just walked into the Holy Sepulchre and prayed there, and then it would have become a mosque. But he didn't do that. He's tolerant. But in the current context, it really sheds light on how Muslims transform non-Muslim places into mosques. Because here it is. He basically said, Omar said, if I prayed in your church, that would have made it a mosque, and my followers would have taken it from you. And guess what? That has happened multiple times historically to Christian churches and to other non-Muslim temples of worship historically. And it's not just that, of course. The interesting point is that prayers are often seen, communal prayers are often seen as consolidating conquests. So if you conquer a non-Muslim region, the way you consolidate your absolute control symbolically is by having communal prayers, by creating a masjid, right? A mosque there. And there's, again, so many examples of this happening going back to Muhammad. Okay, so the Kaaba in Mecca was, of course, a temple, a pagan temple full of idols. And after he conquered Mecca, he marched in and smashed all the idols and prayed, and it became a mosque. Now it's the greatest mosque for the Muslims. Same thing with Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. It's built intentionally on what was Solomon's temple. They knew that. They knew that's Solomon's temple, and they built it there. Of course, the temple was gone by then, so they didn't have a chance to destroy it. But in the case of the Church of St. John, also in Jerusalem, very famous at the time church, the Umayyad Mosque was built atop it. How? Well, the Caliph Walid I, seized the church and completely destroyed it and cleansed it and rebuilt it as a mosque. That has happened on multiple occasions all throughout history. Now, the most famous one, of course, which we can look at, is the conquest of the Hagia Sophia, Holy Wisdom, in Constantinople, and how that became a mosque. And luckily, unlike all the other anecdotes or transformation of non-Muslim temples into mosques, most of the ones I just mentioned, the Kaaba, even the St. John Church, and Al-Aqsa, these are in the 7th and 8th century. So we don't have copious primary sources to look at the details, but we do have a lot for the sack of Constantinople and the transformation of Hagia Sophia into a mosque. So let's briefly look into that. As we know, the famous, and we have a lot of information because it's closer to us in time. The aforementioned ones are from the 7th and 8th centuries. Hagia Sophia, this is 15th century. So we have a lot of records. And anyone who's interested, I copiously recorded them in chapter 7 of Sword and Scimitar. And I'm going to give you some quotes actually here. This is where I sourced it from. If you want the actual citations, they're in the book in the endnotes. So on May 29th, 1453, the Ottoman Turks, the Muslims, finally took and sacked Constantinople, where Hagia Sophia is. And at the time, Hagia Sophia was about 1,000 years old, and it was one of the most glorious basilicas of Christendom at the time. So what did the Muslims do on entering this, magnificent church? Well, they engaged in abominations and rapes and all sorts of things. Here's a quote. They, quote, engaged in every kind of vileness within it, making of it a public brothel. On its altars, they enacted perversions with our women, virgins, and children, including the Grand Duke's daughter, who was quite beautiful. These are eyewitness accounts. She was forced to lie on the great altar of Hagia Sophia with a crucifix under her head as a way of mocking her, and then gang raped. All right? This is what they did on the altar of this church. Okay? Then they paraded the Hagia Sophia's big cross crucifix in a mocking procession throughout the camp, beating drums before it, and according to the source that I'm reading, crucifying Christ again with spitting and blasphemies and curses. They placed a Turkish cap upon his head, the statue of Christ, and jeeringly cried, "Behold the God of the Christians." Okay? All the other churches in that ancient city suffered the same fate. Here's another quote. The crosses which had been placed on the roofs or the walls of churches were torn down and trampled. The Eucharist was hurled to the ground. Holy icons were stripped of gold, thrown to the ground and kicked. Bibles were stripped of their gold or silver illuminations before being burned. Icons were without exception given to the flames. Patriarchal vestments were placed on the haunches of dogs. Priestly garments were placed on horses. All, of course, as a way to mock Christianity and Christians. And then, again, the quotes continue. Everywhere there was misfortune. Everyone was touched by pain when, quote, when Sultan Muhammad finally made his grand entry in the city. There were lamentations and weeping in every house, screaming in the crossroads, and sorrow in all churches. The groaning of grown men and the shrieking of women, accompanied by looting, enslavement, separation, and mass rape. All right, these are all the quotes. Again, you can see them in Sword and Scimitar. Okay. Then, after all that, came the grand moment to consolidate Islam's triumph, like I was telling you. First, there's the sack and the rapine, and then finally you get the consolidation. Sultan Muhammad II entered Hagia Sophia, quote, marveling at the sight. But before long, he emulated his namesake, the Prophet Muhammad, who, as I mentioned, on entering the Kaaba, had smashed all its idols. So now Sultan Muhammad ordered all the destruction of Hagia Sophia's many crosses, statues, and icons. And then he himself knocked over and trampled on the main altar of the basilica before ordering a muazzin to ascend the pulpit and sound their, quote, detestable prayers. Their detestable prayers. Again, I'm quoting a contemporary Christian eyewitness. He continues, then this son of iniquity, this forerunner of Antichrist, mounted upon the holy table to utter forth his own prayers, thereby turning the great church into a heathen shrine for his God and his Muhammad. Okay, so that's what happens where Muslims pray. England, all right? And again, that account which I gave you, we have such details simply because it's closer to us in time. But I have no doubt the same exact rituals and worse occurred during the sack of all the other churches, the ones I mentioned, and all the thousands in between them over the centuries. All right. So there are the two components, right? First, we started talking about Doormat Christianity. And then we talked about Muslims in London turning doormat Christians into their personal prayer mats, symbolically. So now let's combine these two events, and both of which, like I said, took place during my recent sojourn, and see what we can come out of it. All right. Now, again, you have to understand that what the Muslims did in London, that is absolutely 100% a show of dominance and heavily laden with symbolism. The vast majority of the Muslims that did that were more interested in making a point than they were in actually engaging in prayer. Okay? Because if they were interested in engaging in prayer, they could have done it in one of the millions of other mosques, and I'm exaggerating by millions, but the countless other mosques in London, right? But no, they wanted a show of dominance, a collective show of, look at us infidels, here we are in solidarity, here we are, the pious Muslims, you swine-eating gluttons, okay, and sexually depraved, all right, fill in the blank, and they're letting you know that, okay? And they have no compunction, they have no shame, and what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? See? Because they know you're a doormat. What are you going to do about it? You're going to complain? Yeah, I saw a lot of people complain. Now what? Now what? They know, okay? So rest assured, that definitely was a show. London, of course, I mean, Sadiq Khan, this guy's been there, I think, the elected mayor 3 times, I believe. So, yeah, it's kind of a lost cause. Your greatest city is now lost, and you did nothing. You fled and went into the countryside. But make no mistake of it, they're coming for you there too. All right. It's a matter of time. But the reason they could get away with this show of dominance is, again, why? Because Christians have been bred into being doormats, and Western people in general, because Western people are de facto Christians, irrespective of their personal theological convictions or lack thereof. They behave like Christians because that is the culture they were born and bred into. And that's the values that they share. Humanism is a byproduct of Christianity. It wouldn't exist in a vacuum. Okay, so it's just amazing when you think about, and here's what I mean again by how absurd this is. So England and all these European or Western nations invite Muslims and say, oh, freedom of religion, freedom of this. And then Muslims collectively do this show of dominance, blasting out verses from the Quran, from Allah, from the God who is saying his book. We have his book. We can read it. And that book says for Muslims to hate, war on, and kill you, the English. Do you not see how absurd this has become? You invite them over. You give them unprecedented privileges. Their book openly says, I hate you and my God wants me to kill you. And then they engage in very obvious supremacist, divisive acts, to say nothing of the criminality, the rapes, and all the other things. Okay? And they're blaring out and blasting verses from their book, which supports their hostility for you. And you're wondering why, right? All right. This gets depressing. And it's not my purpose to necessarily depress you, though depression is sometimes a good tonic to get you to see the reality. But so now let's slightly segue to another. We're still talking about doormats and Muslims, and in the context of what happened in London. But have you ever stopped to think about who profits from doormat Christianity? Okay. It's not Christians. It's not just regular people who need help. It's the people who are evil and who hate Christianity. All right. And that's why they're the ones who promote doormat Christianity. That's why they're the ones who will fund mega churches to preach doormat Christianity. That's why doormat Christianity is allowed to have a voice in the media. Okay. Because it's the only form of Christianity that is acceptable, because it works for them. It allows them to do whatever they want, to proceed exactly as they want, because there's no obstacle, because it's a doormat. Doormats are not obstacles. You wipe your feet on them. Okay? So there's even a sadistic element to it. Now, this Sadiq Khan, for example, and what I find very interesting, and there's a historical lineage to what I'm going to tell you, but I just told you that, who profits from it? Well, it's people who don't like Christianity, people who want to subjugate it, like Muslims, who doctrinally are called to do so and historically have done so, and in the present to do so in the Islamic world where they're the majority. Okay. But it's funny because Muslims have historically and in the now also preached doormat Christianity to Christians. Okay. In other words, Muslims who don't believe in Christianity call on Christians to behave like doormats and say, aren't you a Christian? You should be like this. Precisely so Christians can get in line and fall down and not resist anything. And this Sadiq Khan of London did precisely this. The same man, the mayor of London, who enabled this mass Muslim show of power, expressed disappointment that some Christians, like the one I quoted, Timothy, were actually failing to get in line and behave like doormats. Okay, so look at this quote. It has some reverse psychology elements to it. Sadiq Khan said, quote, "The Christians I meet love their neighbor, their Muslim neighbor, and I'm disappointed that this year these people have decided to criticize iftar in the square. They're going to the lowest common denominator, but I think British people are better than that." Allow me to translate this for you. First, I'm shocked and disappointed. I'm horrified that, I thought Christianity is about loving your neighbor, loving your Muslim neighbor. So I'm shocked and horrified that there's these people who are identifying themselves as Christians and they're criticizing what we're doing. How could they? Why are they not doormats? That's what Christianity is. I thought it was about loving your neighbor, right? No, there's nothing else to it. Just love your neighbor. No balance, no justice. No. And then, and then the reverse psychology. They're going to the lowest common denominator, but I think British people are better than that. So, Sadiq Khan expects you Brits to be better than that. And you will be better than that. You'll show them. Show more love. Okay? None of this, criticizing iftar. Remember, you're a doormat. Love your neighbor. You love your Muslim neighbor. Okay? And then it's, if you know what I know about these things, but, okay, Sadiq Khan's Pakistani, right? Pakistan is absolutely one of the most atrocious nations to non-Muslims, especially Christians. Okay, I mean, I for 15 years, I've been writing a monthly report where I look all around the world to see where Christians are being persecuted. Probably one of the worst is Pakistan. Places in sub-Saharan Africa, like Nigeria, have a higher death count. But as far as, degrading behavior of Christians, treating them like they're animals, in Pakistan, they literally, like the dirtiest jobs or sanitary workers, they publicly say only Christians can apply. We won't allow a Muslim to do this work, but a Christian can do it. Okay. And if you don't believe me, go look into it. But they're persecuted in horrific ways. Their churches are attacked. I remember in 2023 alone, I think something like 40 churches were destroyed in a place called Jaranwala in Pakistan because some Christians were falsely accused of burning the Quran. As if any Christian, when they're 1 or 2% in Pakistan, is ever going to do that, seeing how Muslims react. And a few years earlier, as an example, they took a Muslim, a Christian man and his wife, young couple, and the woman was pregnant. And on a false accusation that they had burned a Quran, these peasant workers who don't even know how to read and don't know what a Quran is, they tortured them and burned them alive, including the pregnant woman. Okay. And that's usually why it's very important for the cops to arrest and throw these blasphemers into a dungeon, and where they never get justice, because it's safer than leaving you to the mob, the Pakistanis. Okay. Now, that's the epistemology that Mr. Sadiq Khan grew up in. I don't care if he was born or raised in England. Okay. He's first generation or whatever generation. You know these things. They're part of your kind of worldview. Now, maybe he doesn't believe that in his heart. Okay, fine. But isn't it amazing that that's his nation, that's his homeland? He knows how it is. He knows how Christians are treated there, okay, like animals. And yet he's there in the UK asking to bring in more of Pakistanis and telling Christians to get in line because you need to love your neighbor, and I'm disappointed in you. Yeah? You see how this game goes? And by the way, he's one of many. I've through the years, I've been following this particular topic, and there are any number of Muslims who like to play Christian theologian and tell Christians what they need to believe, that is, to be doormats. One notable instance occurred, I think, in 2020, when at the time Senator Mark Rubio criticized Georgia Senate candidate Raphael Warnock because Warnock claimed that Christians could not serve both God and the military. They had to be doormats. And then Somalia-born Representative Ilhan Omar turned to quoting the Bible in a tweet, okay? In a tweet where she put an embarrassed face, meaning like what Rubio was saying is so cringe. But as you'll see, the embarrassing emoji is appropriate, primarily for her horrible spelling and illiteracy. But basically, if I can decipher this correctly, what she wrote is that, quote, Matthews 6:24, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and the money. Okay. The lies and smears of the GOP have no boundaries, but this is a disgrace and shameful. So here's this Muslim-born woman from Somalia trying to tell Americans that, you can't serve God and serve in the military and she's quoting the Bible and calling you a hypocrite because she really cares, right? Meanwhile, just like Khan from Pakistan, she hails from Somalia, which is the #1 worst Muslim nation that persecutes Christians in the world. Okay. It's #2 in the entire world. #1 would be North Korea. #2 is Somalia. But considering that the top 50 Muslim nations that attack and persecute Christians are primarily Muslim, that this is #2 means basically it's the #1 Muslim nation where Christians are being persecuted. In Somalia, if you just come out and someone finds out you're a Christian, you could and likely will get killed. Okay. There's no churches. There's no, if there are, they're like deep, deep underground. Okay. That's the worldview that this woman hails from. This woman who's complaining about how you can't serve God and also go in the military. Why? Well, because she wants you to lay flat in your face and be a doormat, just like Khan. Okay. She wants to tell you what your faith in religion and Christianity is, this Muslim woman. And, you know, if I recall, you know, the idea basically from all these people before I actually proceed is that they're calling again for what? Doormat Christianity. What is that again? Well, it's this belief that to be a good Christian is to be passive, non-judgmental, non-confrontational. Again, it's a heresy that deems lying down before an enemy, which, by the way, is very easy to do. It deems that as an act of virtue. That's why a lot of people pat themselves on the back. I'm a good Christian because I do nothing. Look at me. I turn the other cheek. No, you're a coward. You're scum, actually. All right. And your numbers are growing, but they're also going to be eliminated soon enough. But be that as it may, the idea and what they're saying, these people, is that, okay, Muslims are persecuting Christians around the world in Somalia and Pakistan. So what? Muslims are appropriating Christian public spaces in the show of Islamic supremacism in London. Again, so what? Your job, Christian, is to show some love and tolerance. Turn the other cheek. You know, say a prayer, fall down, feel guilty for your own crimes. And if you don't have any, feel bad about your ancestors, what they did 500 years ago, which was basically protect Europe against Islam. But now they're the bad guys for that too. All right. But if you want to see how far this sort of thing goes, it actually goes back to Barack Hussein Obama. Remember him? Now, let me give you some quotes from Mr. Obama, which, again, you'll see how subtly he's promoting doormat Christianity, okay? So here's one. He said once, let me see. Okay. So he once said, quote, on Easter, it was Easter, I do reflect on the fact that as a Christian, I'm supposed to love. All right. This is in 2015. 3 days after an Islamic terror attack targeting Christians killed 147 Christians in Kenya. And this act had provoked a few American Christian groups to express anger and demand justice. So that's why he's saying this. And let me give you the continuation. That's why he's saying on Easter, I do reflect on the fact that as a Christian, I'm supposed to love. And then he continues. And I have to say that sometimes when I listen to less than loving expressions by Christians, I get concerned. He's talking about those Christians who were really upset at the latest Islamic terror attack, which happened 3 days before and claimed nearly 150 Christian lives. Okay. So isn't that again a call to be a doormat? What he's saying, right? It's Easter, and I believe Christianity is about love, and I'm concerned that Christians are noticing Muslims killing people and like wanting to do something about that. That's not good. You're not being a true Christian. And you know, this sort of thing was always during his tenure. So on February 5th, 2015, during the National Prayer Breakfast, Obama directly invoked doormat Christian tenets, again, to shame Christians for being too critical of Islam. He said this, quote, lest we get on our high horse and think that this is unique to some other place, remember that during the Crusades and the Inquisition, people committed terrible deeds in the name of Christ. So what is he talking about? Well, this is 2015. I remember exactly what he was talking about. I wrote about it. He said, lest we get on our high horse and think that this was the Islamic State in Syria and in Iraq, showing videos of beheadings of people, sex slavery, people being crucified, people being roasted in cages, people being buried alive. Okay, that's what he was referring to. So Obama said, lest we get on our high horse and think that this, what I just detailed to you, is unique, he said, to some other place. Remember the Crusades and the Inquisition. People committed terrible deeds in the name of Christ. There we go again. Classic doormat Christianity invocation. All right. So what? Muslims today are burning people alive, skinning them, raping them, selling them on the market, beheading them. 2015. This is actually also the same time when the 21 or 20 cops and the one West African had their heads sawn off on a video. So it's the same time. And instead of condemning or doing something about that, here's Obama telling Christians he's concerned. And by the way, remember, you guys did the same thing in the Crusades. Really? Yeah. You see, again, when I talk about fake history, that's why it's dangerous. Because when he said that, the Crusades and the Inquisition, everyone assumes that, yeah, he's right. The Crusades and Inquisition are horrible. Well, you don't know the exact context, do you? Including for the Inquisition. I already told you about the Granada example and the Muslims. That's what led to the Inquisition when they realized all these Muslims were lying and pretending to have become baptized Christians, and yet they were still working for Islam. That's what led to it. One of the main reasons, at any rate. So as you can see, Muslims today are engaging in this sort of thing, trying to shame Christians to become doormats. But the funny thing is, they've been doing this for a long time. Now I'm going to share with you an interesting anecdote of Muslim. So when the first crusade that was launched in 1095, this is now around 1098. The first crusaders are now besieging Antioch, which at the time, Antioch is where the word Christian was actually coined. That's how old of a Christian region it was. But when the crusaders came, it was held by Muslims and they were besieging it. So the Fatimid Caliph sent some of his emissaries to talk to the Crusaders and see what's going on. And then here's the actual chronicle, what it says. Okay, the emissaries told the Europeans how their masters were, quote, amazed that you should seek the sepulchre of your Lord, because they're coming to the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, as armed men, exterminating their people, the Muslims, from long-held lands, indeed butchering them at sword point, something pilgrims should not do. So here are the Crusaders engaged in war against Muslims, and they're pilgrims, of course. All the Crusaders were pilgrims, armed pilgrims. And these Muslim emissaries are saying, our masters are amazed. I thought you're like a Christian. You're here coming to be a pilgrim and go to the Holy Sepulchre, and you're doing it by fighting and trying to kill our people. Okay. So just like their modern day counterparts, Khan and Omar and Obama, okay, these Muslims also didn't say anything about what their people had been doing to Christian subjects and pilgrims coming to visit the Holy Land. That is to say, extorting, torturing, raping, killing them, okay, for years before the Crusade, which is in fact what led to the First Crusade in the first place. Okay, so as you can see, these emissaries were behaving just like their modern day descendants. But to their credit, the Crusaders did not behave like their modern day descendants, like doormats. They actually stood firm. They were not duped. Okay, so according to the account of Robert the Monk, one of the earliest primary sources, the Crusaders, quote, with one accord replied, no one with any sense should be surprised at us coming to the sepulchre of our Lord as armed men and removing your people from these territories. Any of our people who came here with staff and scrip, meaning as an unarmed pilgrim, were insulted with the abominable behavior, suffered the ignominy of poor treatment, and in some cases were killed. Okay? And this, by the way, was actually an understatement, because if you look at the records, which a lot of these Crusaders didn't even know what was happening before, the pilgrims were being savaged, mauled, killed, and raped. Some years earlier, for example, And as just as one of countless telling examples, a pilgrim wrote about what Muslims did to a noble abbess of graceful body, a pretty nun, basically, okay, and of a really pious and religious outlook. I'm quoting. She had joined a German pilgrimage to Jerusalem, which I think was in 1064. According to the quote, the pagans captured her, and in the sight of all, these shameless men raped her until she breathed her last, to the dishonor of all Christians. Christ's enemies performed such abuses and many others like them on the Christians. All right. So that's, but at any rate, aside from that, during the siege of Antioch, right there before the walls of Antioch, the Crusaders continued their response that I just gave you to the Muslim emissaries by saying, quote, the land belonged to our people, Christians, originally, and your people, Muslims, attacked and maliciously took it away from them, which means it cannot be yours no matter how long you have had it. Accordingly, payback will be exercised by Frankish swords on your necks. Right? So that is the difference between doormat Christianity and real Christianity, actually, which is just and fair and honorable. All right? And does not lay before evil and allow evil to spread. As you can see, this emissary, just like modern day Muslims, try to shame these Christians and say, whoa, isn't your religion about peace and love? You should come as a peaceful pilgrim, and why are you hurting Muslims? And they told him the truth, because you guys are killing our people, Christians. And, we've seen it. And now, and moreover, this was Christian land. You see, they knew that. They understood that the Holy Land, the Middle East, Egypt, Syria, North Africa was Christian land. So you maliciously took it by conquest and force. All right. And now you don't have any right to it, and you're doing what you're doing. Accordingly, payback will be exercised by Frankish swords on your necks. And the emissaries left quickly. Okay. That's the difference. All right. So once again, to reiterate, you can see how when it comes to doormat Christianity, this thing exists to serve exclusively evil, non-Christians, and especially those who hate Christianity. Okay. That's what it exists for. It empowers them. It allows you never to resist. It allows you to die at their hands, at least spiritually, and to be walked all over. That's the whole point of it. And I just find it amazing that people still don't get this. And like I said, this recent visit to England kind of underscored it with what happened. Because on the one hand, I spoke to a lot of great people, good people. I like the Brits, okay, but I think they all sense they're on a downward spiral that's just kind of being flushed down very quickly, and they all have these theories about what's going to happen and what they're going to do, and none of them seem actually meaningful. It's just a way of saying, oh, we're working on this, but no. And as time progresses, the Muslims march on, okay, and we saw what happened. So like I said, in a symbolic way, Christians are going from being doormats to being prayer mats, as we just saw with what happened in London. All right. I'm going to end it there. Let's see if you all have some more things to say. All right. Zaman, thank you for all your work. You are appreciated. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Lies destroy lives. David Wood did a live stream a while back where he pointed out that according to Islamic texts, Allah does not hear prayers when they're prayed in the street or in front of dogs. Yeah, well, I definitely know about the dog one. There's all sorts of strictures in the hadith about things that annul a prayer. And I definitely know about the dog one, which explains why the dogs are not liked. I don't know about the street, because I know Muslims pray in the street all the time. We just saw it, right? So yeah, that'll be interesting to look into. Lies destroy lives. When Muslims pray in the street, it's purely an act of dominance. According to Islamic texts, Allah does not hear such prayers. Oh, it sounds like you're saying the same thing. Okay, so maybe that's the argument, that a street prayer is not legitimate. So if it's being done, it's purely as an act of dominance. Okay, that's interesting. But I just know historically Muslims, including Muhammad, prayed in the street, what would be called the street, because mosques did not exist. Mosques, masjid, just meant a place that you fall down and pray in. Okay. I'm not arguing this because this has some appeal too, but good to know. Crazavon. Raymond, thank you so much for all your work. Can you clarify the distinction between sunnah and hadith? I can. Hadith is a reference, and that's kind of like, okay, so hadith means a report. It's a little writing, and usually it's very short about something Muhammad or maybe one of the companions said or did. And it has this long isnad. The bulk of it is basically, so-and-so told so-and-so that so-and-so said so-and-so, and it goes all the way back to some guy who heard it from Muhammad, for example. Okay, that's the hadith. And then they have a whole science, as they call it, about determining what's a sahih hadith. Sahih means like a authentic hadith that we can now put in the canon. And what's a weak hadith, meaning we don't know, it's not necessarily, it's weak, it's not necessarily true. So they have all these categories. And then based on that, the sunnah, which means the example of Muhammad, is derived. So once you go through all the hadith and you've determined which is the real hadith, which is the weak hadith, which has consensus, which has a strong isnad, and so forth, then you derive the way, how a Muslim should live, okay, based on all that. And that becomes known as the sunnah, the example that you were following, the example of Muhammad. So we are the Sunnis, who are the majority of Muslims, like 90% of the Islamic world. They are named after the idea that we are slavishly following those aspects of the hadith that have become codified and accepted as part of Muhammad's words or deeds. I hope that helped. Drios, if Muslims praying causes calamity, shouldn't we as spiritual Israel do the same? How many verses are there when Israel cried to God and were delivered? We really don't read the Bible. Yeah, I especially agree with that latter part. So yeah, I mean, well, I think what you're saying is that prayer is important, right? And that, non-Muslims, Christians, and so forth, spiritual Israel, of course, means Christians should do the same. So yeah, of course, Christians should pray. This is the whole point. It's not an either or. The problem is all these people who want you to, the doormat Christians, they want you to think it's either I fall down and pray and weep and cry and never move, don't do anything, no initiative, just wait until God answers you, or you're like a militant savage who's fighting and never praying. Well, it can be both, right? You can't. That is the Crusaders. That is the historic Christian fighters and warriors. They were very religious. They were very pious. Look at the military orders I wrote about, the two swords of Christ. Okay, they prayed all day. They fasted. They were conservative, traditional Christians, and then they fought and they took the initiative. Okay, so it's not an either or. Canadian, eh? I've tried explaining this stuff to friends, but the Western mind can't seem to comprehend this level of cynicism necessary to do such atrocious acts for now. Yeah, that's a real problem. The Western mind the problem is too many people of the whole world, actually, they tend to project, okay? Which means whatever my culture, my worldview, the norms that I accept, I always project on other people and just think, yeah, deep down inside, they're like me. They may be screaming jihad, Allah Akbar, but yeah, he wants what I really want in the end. Yeah, that's dangerous. And a lot of people do that. And Muslims do that too. So Muslims by nature are mistrusting of the infidel. And because why? Because they, as Muslims, will never help the infidel because he's the enemy. So when a non-Muslim tries to become nice to a Muslim, the Muslim's thinking initially, at least, like, wow, what is this guy really up to? I don't trust him. He's up to no good. Now I think they realize that the infidel is just an idiot and an imbecile, and they exploit and take advantage of it. But for the longest time, I would see this often, and I've had these conversations where, Muslims can never accept that the Western European is genuinely trying to help them. They're convinced that this is all part of a, some machination to actually hurt and destroy Islam. Snowdrifter. Hi, Ray. Would you consider TikTok to spread your message far and wide? I've seen many streamers use YouTube and TikTok at the same time. We need you, sir. Yeah, I am all for this sort of thing. I just don't even know what these things are. I have a lot of good people who are helping me. So with social media and this sort of thing, but I just have no interest in it. But I agree with you. It's a tool. It's a medium. It's good to spread the word. So I'm all for it. I'm not saying I'm against it. I just have to, as you can see, I don't even know what I'm doing with this, but anyway. Parlock. Didn't leftists cry about Christians massacring Native Americans and enslaving Africans, and now it's Christian nature to be a doormat? Yeah. So on the one hand, you can show righteous indignation about one group doing something bad, but then, when it comes to the Christian, he has to be a doormat. I think that's what you're saying, which I agree with. Dreek, deeply appreciate your historical insights. Well, thanks, Dreek. I appreciate that. Thank you. Pop the kettle on love. Ray, you would love Rhodes, the Hospitallers Island. I probably would. I may be visiting it, actually, I hope, within the year. I've written a lot about it. Drios, to clarify, before war and during captivity, they cried to God and were delivered. Like you said, we should take both swords. Yeah, thanks for that clarification. Thanks for bringing up the two swords, because we must come back again to the theology of the two swords of Christ, which I'm going to be writing an article about it, a very comprehensive one on Substack. If you're not there, you should subscribe. I'm getting back into writing a lot and enjoying it. If you don't know, that's really what I've been doing for well over 20 years now. I think my first published article came out in 2005, so 21 years, or actually 2004. But so I'm getting into a lot of writing, but that theme of the two swords, I'm trying to lay it out more articulately in an article. And long and short of it, for you, the viewer, is the two swords theology goes back to the chapter or the verse in Luke where Christ tells his followers, his disciples, he who has no sword, go sell your cloak and buy one. And they look around, they find two swords and say, look, Lord, here are two swords. And he says, that's enough. And it ends. Now, of course, the modern doormat Christians, that verse means absolutely nothing. It has no meaning. What does it mean? It's not swords, right? So what is he talking about? I don't know. He's playing head games with them, telling them you need a sword, but then he's like, no, that's enough. You don't know what you're talking about. That's one of the interpretations. But for medieval Christians and a lot of other Christians before and after medieval Christians, what it meant is that Christians are armed with two swords, one for spiritual warfare, which I think modern day Christians still sort of accept, but one also for secular warfare, physical, real warfare. Okay. And one was supposed to be exercised by the church, the spiritual sword. And one was supposed to be exercised by what was defined as Christian warriors, Christian princes and kings, secular lay Christians. Okay. And I'll probably do a live stream because it's a very important topic, maybe my next one, about how you need the two swords of Christ, because historically Satan has been using two swords as well, one physical and one spiritual. Okay. And they are both wreaking great havoc today. The physical sword is wreaking great havoc amongst Christians around the world. But in the West, where Christianity has historically been dominant, Satan's been using the second sword, the spiritual sword of subversion. Okay. And that's what's been going on now. And that's why you need the two swords of Christ to parry Satan's swords. And I think that's enough for now. I'm going to go and make that bowl of pasta now. So thanks for joining me. And I'll see you again anon. Take care. Bye.